Now, the lieutenant governor's race has not had a lot of oxygen. We haven't heard a lot from the candidates. So in this program, we're going to do one-on-one interviews with the lieutenant governor candidates. And we start off with Byron Mallott. And Byron, you were originally a candidate for governor and then joined Bill Walker on what's been dubbed as the Unity ticket. And we'll get to that, but one of the things I wanted to do first is for people to get to know you.
Well, you know, I was born and raised in Yakutat at a time when it was a much smaller community even than it is now, some 250 people roughly, mostly Alaska Native, Tlingit. My mother was full-blooded Tlingit. My father had come to Alaska at a young age during the Great Depression and settled in Yakutat. Said he loved the mountains. You know, Yakutat is surrounded by the St. Elias Mountains, the highest mountain range from sea level to altitude in the world, and made his life there.
So he's non-native then?
He is. He was born and spent his early years in Washington State.
So what was it like growing up in Yakutat? I guess you were basically the product of a bicultural marriage.
Absolutely, but in a Native community. And my father and my mother were both very entrepreneurial. You know, Yakutat was impacted by World War II. The military built a very large air base there. And so life was really changed during that time in the 1940s. And my father worked for the military after having been a commercial fisherman and big game guide and hunter and trapper, and essentially what we call today a subsistence family living off the land. My parents had a very large garden that I recall as a child. It was really seemingly to us children an idyllic life, but of course my parents worked very hard. And right after the war, my mom and dad began a general store, which my father built by, and I recall doing this myself, walking the beautiful ocean beaches of Yakutat, which are more than 100 miles of beautiful sand beach, and salvaging lumber and hauling that to town in my dad's old Studebaker truck and building this building that became our family store, which is still operating today.
What would you say was one of your biggest challenges, one of the greatest difficulties that you shouldered, and how did you work through that?
Dealing with family alcoholism. My mother fought alcoholism her whole adult life. A wonderful mother. She just impacted my life so much. At the time, they seemed like small things, but they grew into big things, like saying, son, you know, you need to read books. Son, when you know others are playing cards or doing other things, you need to study. My mother's constant admonitions that you can be whatever you work hard to be. Not that my father wasn't saying that also, but because knowing what my mother was wrestling with every single day, trying to be a really good person and a wonderful parent, gave real meaning to those words.
But her alcoholism, that could have been confusing.
It was, and I had uncles who, on my mother's side, who were just wonderful young men, my heroes. They had just come back, for example, from the Second World War in the Navy and from the U.S. Merchant Marine, and then from the Korean War, young men coming back home from the military, all crisp and clean with military bearing, and within several years being alcoholic. It was very confusing, and it made me ask questions about why and what what is ahead for us, what was ahead for me. So I think it instilled in me a notion of number one, not taking my life for granted, that one has to work hard, one has to have a sense of purpose. I don't know that at a young age I was using those kinds of words, but certainly, what I was seeing and what I was living with my sisters was certainly impacting my life. Another big impact on my life was going away to boarding school. In the 50s and 60s.
Where did you go to boarding school?
We still didn't have high school in our smaller communities. And in Yakutat, when my sister and I were ready for the first grade, the school in Yakutat burned down, and so my parents sent us to a Catholic mission school in Skagway, where we spent our first grade year, the entire year, away from our parents. And while I look at that year and think of it in terms of myself, although I don't remember much of it, once again, later you reflect and say, wow, what must have that been like for our parents, to have their
to give you up at
5 and
6
6-year-old children being sent away to school. And those days, there was no money to travel and visit on holidays or for you to come home on holidays or anything like that. You were gone the whole year. And then, of course, went away to high school, to boarding school. And the boarding school experience, I would also say, was among the very defining of my life, mostly by introducing me to other kids from throughout the entire state, and coming to know them, and realizing, and again, we didn't use words like this in those days, but what an incredibly diverse place that we live in.
Now, where did you go to high school?
Well, I went back to the Catholic mission in Skagway for a while, but then went to Sheldon Jackson School in Sitka, where I graduated. And, among my schoolmates were people like Oliver Levitt and James Nagiak from Barrow, and across the channel, this was in Sitka, Mount Edgecombe School, the big BIA school, which had about 800 students in those years from all across the state, where future Native leaders like Morris Thompson and Jake Adams and Charlie Edwardson, and so and Al Adams. You just went to school with all of these young people that
became leaders later.
That ultimately you also entered life with and worked together closely in later years.
Well, time is going to slip away fast, so I quickly want to go through this random walk. The boarding school, certainly I could see where that would be defining, but you were also mayor of Yakutat and mayor of Juneau. What did that teach you?
Well, when I was mayor of Yakutat, I came home from college. I was 22 years old. My father had passed away. And I just felt an obligation to continue what he was trying to do with a full range of other local leaders, of course, to change our community. Basic things like he got an old road grader and worked on it himself with a partner in order to get it running so they could grade the streets. He worked hard to build an electrical system for the town and running water, and and those were basic, obviously, but important things. And I just felt that I wanted to be part of that effort, and so I was mayor. Ran with two other friends, one my brother-in-law, and we took over the city. But it was a wonderful experience. But a year later, Governor Egan's office, again, you move from one place and it causes something else to happen, and that was a big shift in my life. Governor Egan's office, the Office of Local Government Affairs, asked if I would go to work in Juneau to help the state work with local governments across the state. And that also put me on a path that...
and you wound up being mayor of Juneau. So
I had never contemplated, yeah. And of course, being mayor of Juneau much, much later in the 90s had more to do with the capital move effort, which was underway at the time, and local community leaders in Juneau not wanting to have a difficult mayoral race, also at the same time that there was a statewide vote on whether or not to move the capital. There was a belief that if I ran, I would do well, which I did. And
so what did you learn from dealing with this standoff? Because there was a powerful push to move the capital out of Juneau. It resurfaces periodically.
It was, something that's impacting me right now. That is, we have to reach out to others. We have to reach out to Alaskans. We have to work together. We have to understand one another. And not that that's something that leads us to a kumbaya type life, but if you don't do that, it's difficult to make progress. And so the Move the Capital effort was all about that, making connections across the state, showing people why keeping the capital in Juneau made sense. It was doing something on a statewide scale that teaches you all about communicating, teaches you all about building relationships, teaches you all about networking. But I also had been, during that first year in the mid-'60s, in state government, and Governor Bill Egan's office got me involved in the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act movement. And that also was all about both internally within the Native community, building relationships, building networking, learning to work together, as well as then working with government, working with the oil industry, because it was at the time that Prudhoe Bay was discovered. The oil industry suddenly emerged as the powerhouse in the state. So those were incredible times.
I want to go to another sort of important feature of our history, the Permanent Fund dividend. And you were director of the Permanent Fund Corporation. What did that teach you?
Well, first I was appointed to the Permanent Fund Corporation Board of Trustees by Governor Jay Hammond, where I served for 8 years, several years as chair during those 8. And this was 1982, just 2 years after the Permanent Fund Corporation itself was created. And so, you learned about building an organization. Again, you learned about working with trustees and staff and an organization that when you walked in you knew little about, but you had an instant obligation to and for. And so it required a sense that you need to be a quick study. Again, you need to be able to work with people. Again, you need to be able to understand the broad policy reasons for what you were doing. And again, most importantly, you had to learn and continue to grow in reaching out to people and understanding who, what, how the Permanent Fund was influenced, who could impact it both positively and negatively, and work hard to create within that knowledge forward movement for the institution.
Well, you talk about relationships, but what did you learn about making money? Because I guess that's the bottom line of what Alaskans care about with that
I had
fund.
been, CEO of Sea Alaska Corporation, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act Corporation for Southeast, and was at the time that I served on the Permanent Fund Board. The Permanent Fund taught me something for my own corporation, because I took back the idea and we created a permanent fund at Sea Alaska Corporation, which the corporation still has today, which helps buffer, the ups and downs of the business, the economy, the business areas in which we find ourselves, and that the permanent fund, you learn that the economy is incredibly powerful, and that it is not monolithic, and that it has millions and millions of moving parts, and not that you need to understand or influence or be involved with every piece of it, but you need to understand it in ways that allow you to make investment decisions, that allow you to be able to plan, and again, allow you to go out into the marketplace and find the best people and organizations possible to help you do the job that you have an obligation to do.
Before we go on to some of the issues specific to this campaign, I do want to talk to you a little bit about some of your experiences. You know, once you retired, you sort of went on this journey, going to places like New Zealand, Hawaii, looking at Native culture here in Alaska and Indigenous culture in other places. And I know that one of your big projects was getting to know a certain explorer in Hawaii.
Nainoa Thompson, who at a young age immersed himself in learning the ancient art and science of Polynesian deep ocean navigating. That is sailing over the horizon with no compass, with no instruments, but knowing the stars and the seas and the clouds and the currents and the bird and the sea life around you, such that you had a general sense all of the time of where you were and where you were headed. So, you know, the Polynesians are credited with being among the world's best navigators for centuries and centuries. And in modern times, Nainoa and other Hawaiian leaders wanted to rebuild that tradition. And so Nainoa taught himself that ancient art of navigation in a poll done in the early 1990s. He was done by a newspaper. He was selected as the #1 most influential Hawaiians because of the work that he was doing, which not just galvanized a resurgence in pride in self and people and knowledge about who they were and their culture and traditions among Hawaiians, but among all peoples of the Pacific. And so he quickly became one of my heroes, and See Alaska had the fortunate opportunity to gift logs to the Hawaiians to build another replica.
Because they didn't have logs that were big enough.
Yeah.
So what are the applications of what you learned from Nainoa Thompson in politics?
Well, I was also, along with Morris Thompson and Willie Hensley and a number
Other prominent Native leaders.
of other Native leaders, a founder of the First Alaskans Institute. And I was the founding president of the First Alaskans Institute. And one of the things that I did very early after talking with the board was take the entire board and staff to Hawaii and met at the Nainoa Thompson home, because they're a very spiritual people. And it's not just knowing everything that is around you, but understanding that you're part of it. That is a very holistic sense that allows you to go over the horizon. And so trying to capture that in an institutional sense, you know, how can we be true to values? How can we, not spiritual in the religious sense necessarily, but religious in a sense that you're part of something larger and that you have greater obligations than just the sense of your day-to-day work. That's one thing that I learned and have tried to apply both in my life and the work that I do.
On the unity ticket, a lot of people think that this was a practical move, you know, somewhat opportunistic, and some Democrats are still not very happy that you pulled out of the governor's race to join a conservative and form a ticket.
Well, you know, once again, it's about a journey. Certainly, running for statewide public office in Alaska is important. It has huge impact on our state and its people and the directions in which we move. And so it's absolutely nothing to be taken lightly. But for me, it's part of a long journey, both for myself, for my family, for my people, and for the state of Alaska. And so if you think of that, what we're doing in the context of a long journey, it doesn't minimize, but it makes more susceptible to change any particular point of the path on which you are on.
I just want to bring up a little bit of history here. You know, you can go to the University of Alaska Library and listen to tapes, exit interviews with Jack Coghill, just furious with Walter Hickel. And a similar thing sort of happened with the Unity ticket. Hickel jumped onto the Alaska Independence Party ticket and rose to the top. But, you know, the relationship at first between Coghill and Hickel was tight, and then it just got very rancorous. So given that you and Walker have some basic philosophical differences, I mean, I don't see how that might work.
I don't think we have philosophical differences. We have deep personally held values. Deep personally held values. But we share a very similar view of Alaska's future and the issues and what we need to do in order to get there. You know, both Wally Hickel and Jack Coghill, bless their souls, are wonderful men. But they, like so many of us, are driven by a partisan ideology. Not that Hickel so much, but it's somehow we have to break that paradigm. We just do as Alaskans.
Well, we see lieutenant governors, though, kind of shelved. I mean, Lauren Lehman, Frank Murkowski. And
but you also see others that have been heavily engaged in administrations. Terry Miller was very close to
Jay Hammond,
as was Lowell Thomas Jr. Fran Omer was a significant part of Tony Knoll's administration. And it can work. And I believe and know strongly that in this instance, it is going to work.
Now, when you stand up on the third floor, and I know you've been there many times, that's where the governor's and lieutenant governor's offices are, it's hard for me to just not stand and look at the gallery of governors up there. Any particular one that stands out to you that you hope the Walker ticket will reflect?
Well, there are three. Not that every governor hasn't contributed something meaningful, but Bill Egan and Jay Hammond and Wally Hickel, they were so unique. Bill Egan was Alaska's first governor, and he was one who brought Alaskans together. Not that there weren't big fights, there always are. And Jay Hammond began to change the way Alaska thinks of itself in a much more broad notion that we have to look at our world totally. He really introduced the notion of being sensitive to our environment into government at a time when that wasn't particularly popular, and he was vilified for it. But as we look back on his service, it was important and it was crucial. And of course, Wally Hickel, with his 7 league boots and massive visions of massive opportunity for Alaska, kept us thinking and kept us believing that, you know, we can be bigger than ourselves. And so those 3 governors really appealed to me, and I had the wonderful opportunity to work with each of them.
Now, let's suppose that Governor Parnell is reelected. So he would basically have 2.5 terms and also be in a position to influence state government, perhaps more than any other governor, based on sheer time in office. How would you view that? What do you think would be in store for Alaska based on that kind of historical influence?
Well, you know, I respect every governor. I respect anyone who steps forward and says, I want to be part of helping move this wonderful state down the road. But I'm running and started my campaign because I was concerned about the direction that I saw the state heading. What seemed to be a dominating influence on the legislature and the administration of the oil industry. Not that I'm blaming them for anything. You know, they're only acting in their in their corporate interests. I saw the introduction of real ideological forces into Alaska, which tend to be anti-government, which tend to be restricting of the Alaskan voice and Alaskan participation broadly in our state government, and that bothers me. And I would be concerned going forward.
So what do you think you could add on Bill Walker's ticket? I mean, once you get in office, things change very differently. You might be iced out. You might be kept at arm's length.
We can be cynical, but it's not going to be that way. I won't let it be that way. Look at my life. Look at what I've done. Look at the things that I've been engaged in Alaska.
How do you think you can help him?
No one has ever quelled my voice, and it will be there, and it will be meaningful. And I said that education was my highest priority. I will be engaged fully in the education policy of the Walker Mallott administration. Issues of climate change and Arctic policy, issues of rural and native development across our state.
But what do you think personally that you bring to the table that can help?
You know, one of the
governor?
reasons that I had a hard time ever even thinking about running for office is because I don't like to use the word I. It's completely foreign to me, the word I, because we're all part of a much larger involvement in life. And my experiences and the things that I've done are a collective. They really aren't the work of an individual. They're the product of everyone and every person who's ever influenced me, the people that I work with. But having said that, all of that with me in that office will engage with Alaskans. I'll be a statewide official who reaches out to Alaskans and says, we want to hear you. We want to listen to you. We want your voice. We will be transparent because I come from a place, a native place, where for a long, long time that voice wasn't heard in state government. And that is not good. I feel it palpably in my soul. And hearing every Alaskan voice in our government is absolutely crucial, not just to a good state government, but it's crucial fundamentally to the kind of democracy that we have in our nation.
So just a final question to wrap things up here. You talk a lot about the native voice. Mm-hmm. What do you think might happen? How would the state benefit if that native voice were heard, a more prominent feature of our state government?
It would help bring us to become one Alaska, which we must become. The idea of an urban-rural divide, the idea that there is still racial tension in our state, which no one can deny, is something we need to work at, and we need to work at in a positive way. There's been incredible progress, but I think that not just the native voice, but all voices that haven't been heard, all voices that are out there saying, listen to me, I have something to say, I have something to contribute, I can help make Alaska better. Those are the range of voices that we need to hear and really connect to every other Alaskan voice.
All right, well, I want to thank you, Byron Mallott, for joining us and
thank you.
Telling us a little bit about your life and philosophy. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.